Naomi Carter, 39 years old, and for most of my life I believed that family was the one thing money could never buy or destroy. I grew up believing loyalty meant sacrifice, and that the people who shared your blood would always stand beside you when life became difficult. I was wrong. The hardest lesson I ever learned wasn't about money, betrayal, or property. It was discovering that sometimes the people who smile at your success are quietly planning how to benefit from your kindness. Looking back now, I realize the signs had always been there. I simply loved them too much to notice. Before I continue, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to EasyS Folktales, and let me know where you're watching from. I truly enjoy reading your stories because they remind me that none of us walks through difficult seasons alone. Now let me tell you how everything changed. We lived in a peaceful neighborhood called Willow Creek, where nearly every house looked picture perfect. The lawns were always trimmed, children rode bicycles after school, and neighbors waved politely as they passed one another. Anyone driving through our street would have assumed our family was close and loving. Inside our home, however, appearances mattered far more than honesty. We had mastered the art of looking happy while hiding years of quiet manipulation behind closed doors. My father, Harold Carter, believed that children existed to make their parents' lives easier. He rarely asked for help politely. Instead, he expected obedience without question. If something needed repairing around the house, he immediately called my name. Whether it was repainting a fence, replacing broken tiles, or fixing plumbing problems, I was always the first person expected to solve them. Whenever relatives praised my work ethic, Dad would proudly say, "Naomi is stronger than most people twice her size." My mother, Diane Carter, was much quieter but no less influential. She had a warm smile that convinced outsiders she was gentle and generous. At home, though, she had a remarkable ability to make guilt sound like love. Whenever I hesitated to help financially, she'd remind me that families supported one another without keeping score. "Love isn't measured in dollars," she often said. At the time, those words sounded comforting. Years later, I understood they were simply another way of ensuring I never questioned how much I gave. Then there was my younger sister, Olivia. She was 3 years younger than me and seemed to glide through life without carrying the responsibilities I had accepted since childhood. She was artistic, charming, and effortlessly likable. Our parents constantly described her as sensitive, insisting she shouldn't be burdened with difficult tasks because she was destined for bigger things. While I worked overtime to help cover family expenses, Olivia was encouraged to chase dreams without worrying about bills or responsibilities. When I turned 18 and started earning a steady income, the requests for help became frequent. Sometimes Dad needed assistance covering property taxes. Other times Mom claimed unexpected medical expenses had emptied their savings. I never questioned them. Every transfer felt like an investment in the people who had raised me. If I skipped vacations or postponed buying things I wanted, I convinced myself it was worth it because I was helping my family stay afloat. Over the years, those sacrifices became routine. One month I paid for a new furnace. Another year I covered expensive roof repairs after a heavy winter storm. I even postponed purchasing my own apartment because my parents insisted they needed temporary financial help just to get through another difficult season. Each time they promised they would repay me when life improved. I believed every promise because trusting them felt easier than imagining they were taking advantage of me. There were moments when small doubts appeared, but I buried them quickly. During birthdays and holidays, expensive gifts always seemed to find their way into Olivia's hands. Designer handbags, jewelry, and luxury weekend trips somehow fit comfortably into my parents' budget, even while they insisted they couldn't afford essential household expenses without my support. Whenever I noticed the contradiction, I reminded myself that families weren't supposed to compare sacrifices. One Christmas remains impossible to forget. My parents surprised Olivia with a beautiful necklace she'd admired for months. Everyone applauded while she cried tears of happiness. I smiled and congratulated her, but quietly wondered how they had suddenly found thousands of dollars for jewelry after telling me only weeks earlier they couldn't pay a contractor without my help. That uncomfortable question lingered in my mind long after the celebration ended. As the years passed, I became the dependable daughter everyone relied upon. If paperwork needed organizing, they called me. If a financial emergency appeared, I solved it. If repairs were necessary, I spent weekends working on the house instead of enjoying my own life. My parents praised my reliability so often that I confused appreciation with affection. I believed being useful was the same thing as being loved. Everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday evening. I returned home after a long day at work and noticed voices drifting from the dining room. They hadn't realized I was back yet. Normally I would have announced myself immediately, but something in my mother's tone stopped me before I reached the doorway. Dad laughed quietly. "You worry too much," he said. "Naomi has never questioned anything we've asked." Mom answered with complete confidence. "Exactly. She thinks helping us makes her a better daughter." Olivia spoke next, sounding uncertain. "But what happens if she expects part of the house someday?" Dad chuckled. "She won't. None of those payments gave her ownership. She volunteered every single time." Mom added calmly, "Even if she asks questions, we'll simply remind her those were gifts made out of love." My heart pounded so loudly I was certain someone would hear it. I stood frozen in the hallway, unable to believe the conversation unfolding only a few feet away. Every memory of overtime shifts, cancelled vacations, and emptied savings accounts rushed through my mind all at once. Without making a sound, I backed away from the doorway and walked to my room. I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I opened my laptop and began searching through years of emails, bank statements, digital receipts, and saved messages. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for another way to help my family. I was looking for the truth. The next morning I woke up long before sunrise, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel emotionally exhausted. Instead, there was an unfamiliar calm settling over me. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my dining table, opened my laptop, and continued digging through every financial record I had accumulated over the last 2 decades. If my family believed I would simply walk away without asking questions, they had underestimated the one skill they had always praised in me: my ability to keep detailed records. Every transfer told a story. There were payments for overdue property taxes, receipts for kitchen renovations, invoices for replacing old windows, emergency plumbing repairs, insurance premiums, and even grocery expenses during months my parents insisted they were struggling financially. I had always believed those payments were temporary loans that would eventually be repaid once things improved. Looking at everything together, however, a painful pattern emerged. Life had improved for them many times. They simply never intended to repay me. I created a spreadsheet and labeled it Family Contributions. One column listed every payment I had made. The second column included dates, reference numbers, invoices, and supporting documents. The third column contained text messages and emails where my parents acknowledged they would pay me back soon. By lunchtime, I had already documented contributions totaling more than $112,000 over 15 years. The number shocked even me. That wasn't generosity. That was an investment built on promises. For several weeks, I kept everything completely private. At work, I smiled during meetings, finished my assignments, and chatted with coworkers as though nothing had happened. No one suspected that every evening I returned home and spent hours organizing evidence that could completely change my future. I scanned handwritten receipts. I downloaded archived bank statements. I recovered deleted emails from old cloud backups. Even forgotten photographs became useful. Pictures of home renovations clearly showed me purchasing materials and supervising contractors while my parents proudly claimed ownership of every improvement. The deeper I searched, the clearer everything became. One Saturday afternoon, I decided it was finally time to speak with an attorney. The first lawyer listened politely before suggesting I simply try to reconcile with my parents. Legal battles between family members usually create permanent damage, he explained gently. I thanked him for his time and left. The second attorney wasn't much different. She sympathized with my situation but believed proving financial contributions would be difficult because most of the payments appeared voluntary. Although disappointed, I refused to give up. A week later, I scheduled another consultation. This time I met Victoria Bennett, an experienced property attorney with a reputation for handling complicated civil disputes. She spent nearly 2 hours reviewing my documents without interrupting. Finally, she leaned back in her chair. "You've done something most clients never do," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You documented almost everything." She pointed toward one stack of papers. "These messages repeatedly describe your payments as temporary loans." She picked up another folder. "These invoices show your direct financial contributions significantly increased the property's value." Then she looked directly at me. "If we can establish that your parents accepted your money while promising reimbursement and later attempted to exclude you from benefiting from those improvements, we may have a very strong claim." For the first time since overhearing that conversation in the hallway, hope quietly returned. Victoria advised me not to confront my family. "Stay calm," she said. "Let them continue believing you know nothing." That advice became my strategy. Over the following months, I documented everything. Whenever my mother texted asking whether I could help pay another unexpected expense, I politely declined and saved every conversation. Whenever my father mentioned future plans for renovating or selling the house, I quietly recorded dates and details in my notebook. Everything became evidence. Everything mattered. One rainy afternoon, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The subject line immediately caught my attention. "Property valuation appointment." I opened it carefully. The message had clearly been sent to me by mistake. Attached was correspondence discussing preparations to place my parents' house on the market within weeks. No one had mentioned selling the property to me. Not once. Victoria smiled when I forwarded the email. "They're moving faster than I expected," she said. "That actually strengthens our position." Over the next several days, she finalized legal documents while I continued organizing every receipt and financial record. The closer we came to filing our claim, the calmer I became. Fear had slowly been replaced by confidence. Months earlier, I would have begged my family for honesty. Now I wanted only accountability. Eventually, mediation was scheduled before the property could legally be sold. The hearing took place inside a modern office building downtown. Everything about the conference room felt cold and professional. Long polished table. Large windows overlooking the city. Neatly arranged folders waiting beside each chair. I arrived early carrying 2 organized binders and several labeled document boxes. A few minutes later, my parents entered. Dad looked irritated. Mom wore the same reassuring smile she used whenever she hoped appearances would solve problems. Olivia followed behind them, noticeably nervous. She avoided making eye contact. "Naomi," Mom said softly, "you really didn't have to involve lawyers." I looked at her calmly. "I tried involving family." Her smile disappeared. The mediator introduced everyone before inviting each side to summarize their position. Victoria began first. She carefully explained that I had contributed substantial funds toward purchasing, maintaining, and improving the family home over many years under repeated assurances that my financial support would eventually be recognized or reimbursed. Then she placed my evidence on the table. Receipts, bank transfers, invoices, emails, text messages. Everything neatly organized in chronological order. Dad immediately shook his head. Those were gifts. Victoria remained perfectly composed. Several written communications described them as loans. She handed copies to everyone present. Mom's expression changed the moment she recognized her own messages. She knew exactly what they said. The room grew noticeably quieter as each document was reviewed one by one. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending myself. The evidence was doing that for me. Atmosphere inside the conference room changed almost immediately. The confidence my parents had carried into the meeting slowly began to disappear as every document was examined. My attorney remained calm, methodically presenting each piece of evidence while the mediator took careful notes. There was no shouting, no dramatic accusations, only facts supported by years of records. My father crossed his arms. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's trying to profit from her own family." Victoria didn't react. "Mr. Carter," she replied evenly, "the issue isn't whether Ms. Carter helped her family. The issue is whether she made substantial financial contributions based on repeated promises that those contributions would be recognized or repaid." She placed another folder on the table. Inside were copies of emails, text messages, and bank confirmations stretching back more than a decade. The mediator adjusted his glasses and slowly reviewed each page. "You've organized this exceptionally well," he said. "I've had years to collect it," I answered quietly. My mother looked at me with watery eyes. "Naomi," she whispered, "surely we don't have to do this. We're family." I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I believed that for years. That's why I kept helping. Silence settled over the room. Olivia finally spoke. "I honestly didn't know how much you gave." I turned toward her. "You may not have known every dollar, but you knew who was always paying whenever there was a crisis." She lowered her head without answering. Victoria continued presenting the financial timeline. Mortgage assistance, major renovations, property maintenance, emergency expenses, insurance payments. Everything was documented with receipts, invoices, or electronic transfers. One by one, every excuse my parents offered collapsed under written evidence. Dad's attorney requested a short recess. Everyone stepped outside except Victoria and me. She smiled for the first time that morning. "They're realizing how strong your case is." A few minutes later, the mediation resumed. This time the opposing attorney sounded noticeably different. He cleared his throat before speaking. "My clients are willing to discuss a settlement." Dad looked frustrated but remained silent. The negotiations lasted several hours. Different figures were proposed. Different terms were discussed. Whenever an offer failed to reflect my documented contributions, Victoria simply slid another folder across the table. The evidence spoke louder than emotions ever could. Eventually, mediation ended without a final agreement. The matter proceeded to court. Over the following weeks, both sides submitted additional documentation. My parents insisted they had simply accepted gifts from a loving daughter. Our legal team demonstrated a consistent pattern of promises, acknowledgments, and financial reliance that painted a very different picture. 6 weeks later, the judgment arrived. I remember sitting quietly at my kitchen table when Victoria called. "We won." Those 2 words carried the weight of years. The court concluded that my documented financial contributions and the circumstances surrounding them justified a significant equitable interest in the property. After the house was sold and the proceeds distributed according to the court's ruling, I received compensation that reflected the years I had spent investing in a home I had never truly been allowed to call my own. It wasn't about becoming wealthy. It was about finally being seen. My parents received far less than they had expected. For the first time, their decisions carried real consequences. I never celebrated their loss. I simply accepted my freedom. With my share of the proceeds, I purchased a comfortable townhouse in another part of the city. It wasn't enormous. It didn't have the biggest yard. But every room represented peace instead of obligation. On the day I moved in, I carried only the things that truly belonged to me. My books, my photographs, my favorite coffee mug, my dreams. The locksmith finished installing new locks before sunset. As he handed me the keys, I smiled. This time, those keys represented security rather than control. Life gradually became quieter, focused on my career. I reconnected with old friends. I traveled on weekends instead of spending them repairing someone else's home. For the first time in years, I began making decisions based on what I wanted instead of what everyone else expected from me. Occasionally my phone still lights up with messages from my parents. Some are apologies. Others attempt to explain away the past. A few simply ask whether we can move on. I don't reply. Forgiveness is a personal choice. Rebuilding trust requires accountability. Some relationships cannot return to what they once were because they were never healthy to begin with. Looking back now, I no longer feel angry. I feel grateful that I finally recognized my own worth before sacrificing even more of my future. The greatest lesson wasn't about legal victories or financial compensation. It was learning that healthy boundaries are not acts of cruelty. They are acts of self-respect. Sometimes people mistake kindness for weakness until they discover that kindness also knows when to stop. If my story teaches anything, I hope it's this. Never underestimate the importance of keeping records, honoring your own value, and refusing to let guilt control your life. Loving your family should never require surrendering your dignity. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. If this story touched you in any way, please like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to Easy as Folktales, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support means more than you know, and your stories encourage others who may be facing similar struggles. Until next time, take care of yourself, protect your peace, and remember that sometimes the strongest victory is simply choosing a better future.